guys, how's it going? Welcome back to Sam's Home Kitchen, where I bring to you budget-friendly recipes with sustainability in mind. This week, we are talking about noodles. One of my very first video on this channel is about making noodles, I think it was like one set noodle or something like that. It has been about 2-3 years and I have been evolving and improving the recipe to a point that when I look back at the recipe, I'm like, yeah, I would never make noodles like that again. So that's why I want to bring to you my learnings, and given the current economy, making noodles at home saves you so much money. We're going to cover two methods. One is utilizing pasta machine, and the other one, we're doing everything by hand. At the end of the video, I'm going to introduce or reintroduce you to one of my favorite way of having noodles. Anyway, you came here for the noodles, not for my talking, so let's jump right into it. So to make noodles, the ingredients cannot be any simpler. Start with some good old plain flour, some water to make the dough, and then some salt. Salt seasons the noodles a bit, but more importantly, it's the key ingredients to encourage gluten formation in our dough to make chewy and bitey noodles. 3 super basic ingredients and that is it. We'll head over this way and get started. One of the best ways to save money while cooking is to work with the scale. You might be thinking that Sam's just talking shit now, but the reality is the more precise we can get, the less ingredients and money is then wasted. So now let's talk some math here. The biggest difference between this recipe and the old one is the hydration. In the original video, the dough was 50% hydration. Over the years, I found the dough still a little bit wet and requires a lot of flour dusting throughout the process. So after trial and errors, I find 45% to be the sweet spot here. I'm making lunch for 2 today, so 2 portions of noodles. We're starting with 100 grams of water. Next, 2 grams of salt per portion, that is 4 grams in. I then grab a whisk to give it a quick stir to dissolve most of the salt, just to speed things up a little bit. Next, 220 grams of flour. I'm doing 50 grams of water to 110 grams of flour just because it's easier to calculate for me this way. But you can make the flour your whole number and do 45 grams of water and 100 grams of flour if you so wish. The second point of difference is, in the original video, I used hot water for some really stupid reason, which cooks most of the flour at contact and prevents gluten formation. The result is a mushier texture.
It has gone mushy. Why is that?
Which I am fixing here with the use of cold water. With this dough being a low hydration one, it's not sticky at all, so we'll just get our hands in to start mixing. I like to use my fingers to break it up and start roughly combining the flour and water together. The initial step here is to get the flour to drink up the water first. Once it looks like this, we leave it rest for 20 minutes. 20 minutes is up. You can see the dough on the right here looks exactly the same as how it was 20 minutes ago. But once you get your fingers in, you'll be able to feel that it's softer and ready to incorporate the rest of the flour. I then tip it all out onto the workbench and start kneading. Keep your arms straight and use your body weight to press the dough down. It should only take about 5 minutes for the dough to form and to look like this. After all those hard work, the dough is now super tough and fights back when you try to push it in. That is the gluten we built up in the dough, which you can see when you put your finger in. Rather than fighting it, we're just going to let it rest for 20 minutes for the gluten to relax. Use the mixing bowl we had earlier to cover. There is no need to waste plastic wrap or bags here. After resting for 20 minutes, let's have a look at how relaxed the gluten is. Press the dough in and you can see the dimple stays, which is a sign that we are ready for the next step. Now, give the dough another knead for a couple minutes until it's all nice and smooth. Once done, given we made 2 portions, I'm going to cut this in half and show you the 2 methods to turn these into noodles. Portion them up evenly using a scale. So with either methods, we're going to start by flattening the dough. Get a rolling pin and we start with some downwards pressing motion. Flatten the dough to a flattish disc as our first step for either methods. If your dough is still not yet super smooth, you can do a couple of laminations. Different to the lamination of puff pastry, here we're folding and rolling to achieve smoothness, not layers. Once we got our dough to a flat and smooth condition, it's time to roll them out further. We'll start with the pasta machine method. For a better rolling experience, mount the pasta machine on a table if possible. This IKEA dining table is great, but it has got an angle inwards underneath, so unfortunately I just can't mount it. Always start rolling at the lowest setting and work your way upwards. Is it just me, or there is something about pasta machine that is just so soothing to watch? The simplicity of the machine and how it takes dough from one end and turn it into noodles on the other. I just can never get enough of it. I work my way down to number 4 for thin noodles and 5 for wider noodles usually. Once we get the thickness we want, I folded the long dough in half and cut it right down the middle so I can handle it with ease, given I'm not as skilled as this dude right here. Last step to do is to send it through the noodle cutter and we have our noodles. Just have a look at these noodles. The beauty of 45% hydration means these noodles are like every second marriage, they just don't stick together. Finish the other half. It's so nice to look at. Normally, if I'm making fresh noodles, this would just go straight into boiling water and it's ready in like a minute. But today, we'll dust it with a little bit of flour while we work on the hand cut method. Onto the other dough. Rather than having a machine rolling the dough out for us, we are doing it all by our hands. Here, the pressing motion on the dough does a better job thinning the dough out at the start compared to rolling. Kind of why you see tortilla being pressed out instead of being rolled out. Anyway, I digress. Now, the dough can benefit from a small amount of flour so it doesn't stick to the rolling pin. Also helps with getting to the desired thinness a lot quicker. And then, just utilize your body weight and roll the dough out. To achieve a more even thickness, make sure you turn and flip the dough throughout the rolling process to get a better consistency. In the end, we should achieve a dough that is about 1.5 to 2 mm thick pretty easily. To make it easier to cut and separate, dust it lightly with some flour. I fold it into a width that I can make one noodle cut per knife movement. No fancy technique is needed with noodle cutting. All we need is to be concise and make clean cuts. Now, this is kind of where I stopped up. Here, my noodles did not separate as elegantly as I wanted them to be because I folded the dough poorly. Rather than folding the dough, I should have just stacked them up like a snake. So when being shaken up after cut, it will come loose a lot easier. I made the mistake, so you don't have to. After all that, we have our noodles made. Yay! We got our hand cut ones on the left and machine rolled one on the right here. So for lunch, I'm going to make my favorite dry noodle using nut butter. Load up a pot with water to cook our noodles. Pot on the stove on medium to high heat. While the water is heating up, we can use the time to prep our noodle sauce. In a mixing bowl, I added a couple of spoons of homemade tahini. Recipe on making tahini can be found in the description. If you don't have any tahini, you can totally sub it with peanut butter. It's just as good. About half the amount of tahini in soy sauce and equal part vinegar. A touch of salt to season and mix it all up until well combined. Once the water is up to boil, we can throw in our noodles. Make sure to break up the noodles once they hit water so they don't stick. The beauty of fresh noodles like this is just they cook so fast. A couple of minutes, once they are floating, they are good to go. Noodles out and straight into the nut sauce. Mix it well. It will appear to be on the dry side most likely. Chuck in some noodle water to sauce it up. Do the same with the machine rolled noodles. Give it a quick stir and in 60 seconds, it's pretty much ready to go. How crazy is that?
Wow. Crazy. You're crazy, girl.
Into the sauce, just like the other one. Noodle water in to loosen the sauce up. I got some spring onion handy, which is just a perfect garnish for any noodles, in my opinion. Noodles in. Spring onions for the visual and aromatics. Homemade chili sauce to top it off. The cost breakdown is right on the screen. One portion of these noodles costed us 12.3 cents to make, compared to store-bought noodles like these. Homemade noodles cost less than half per unit price.
Alright, and there we have it. We've got two types of noodles done right here. One is hand rolled and hand cut, and the other one is with a little bit of help from the pasta machine. Going to dig in, let you know what the texture is like. The hand-rolled and hand-cut noodle, it is the human error within the rolling. Not as perfect as machine-rolled noodles, but it's the imperfection that gives it so much more variation and texture. Really liking this one. Also really good. Visually, the consistency kind of just gives you the impression of there's more noodles in here. But both are really good. I've been making homemade noodle at least 2 to 3 years now, and this version of the dough with low hydration is a lot easier to work with. And the benefit of that is less messy, easier to store in the freezer, and the cooking water is less thick and less starchy.
just overall a better experience. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked the video, give it a like. If not, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. I have a budget recipe coming out every 2 weeks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one.